He was 18 years old when the state decided he was a man, and what he discovered in the shell of his past would change not just his future, but the very definition of home. This is the story of how I found my way back to a place I never knew I'd lost. If you've ever felt like you were on the outside looking in, or that your story was written for you by someone else, hit that subscribe button. We're going to talk about what it means to find your own voice and your own four walls. The bus wheezed to a stop, its air brakes hissing like a tired animal. It was the only sound in a world muffled by falling snow. I stepped off onto the shoulder of a two-lane road that cut through endless sleeping fields. The driver didn't say a word, just closed the door behind me, and with another sigh of hydraulics, the bus pulled away, its red taillights shrinking into the swirling gray until they were gone. Then there was only silence, the kind of profound quiet that feels like a weight on your eardrums. I pulled the thin collar of my jacket tighter around my neck. The state-issued jacket wasn't made for this kind of cold, the kind that felt less like a temperature and more like a presence, something that seeped right through the fabric and into your bones. In my pocket was a folded piece of paper with $112 on it, my final payment from the system. 18 years of my life, valued at $112, and a one-way bus ticket to nowhere. My breath plumed in the air, a fleeting ghost. I looked at the slip of paper I'd been clutching for the entire 5-hour ride. It wasn't an address, just a name. Crestfall Road. That's all my last caseworker could find. A road associated with a grandmother I barely remembered. A woman who existed more as a faded photograph in a file than as a person in my memory. They told me she'd lost the property years ago. Foreclosure. Died in a county home. Another dead end in a life full of them. But it was the only direction I had. So here I was. Crestfall Road. A sign, half rusted and leaning, confirmed it. There were no sidewalks, no streetlights, just the road and the snow-covered fields stretching into a white horizon. I started walking. My worn sneakers were soaked within minutes, the icy slush seeping into my socks. Each step was a small, miserable victory. The wind picked up, a low moan that carried the scent of pine and frozen earth. It was a clean smell, so different from the city's constant perfume of exhaust and damp concrete. For 2 years, I'd lived in a group home where the air always smelled of bleach and simmering frustration. Before that, it was a blur of 5 different foster families in 10 years. Some were kind but distant, others were just doing a job. None of them were home. Home was a word I understood intellectually, like algebra or photosynthesis, a concept I'd learned about but never experienced. I walked for what felt like an hour, my feet and hands going numb. The hope I'd clung to on the bus, that tiny, stupid ember, was flickering out, about to be extinguished by the sheer, indifferent cold. I was about to turn back, to walk to whatever small town was in the other direction and find a shelter, when I saw it. Set back from the road, almost hidden by a stand of skeletal birch trees, was a house. A farmhouse. 2 stories, with a steep, gabled roof and a wide, sagging porch. It was dark. No lights, no smoke from the chimney. A thick blanket of undisturbed snow covered the driveway and the steps, telling me no one had been there in a long time. It had the look of a place that had given up. I knew the feeling. A faded, peeling number was nailed to one of the porch posts. 1412. I didn't know the number of my grandmother's old place, but a strange pull, a flicker of something like recognition, made me leave the road. I pushed through the snow, which was deeper here, reaching my knees. It was slow, exhausting work. By the time I reached the porch steps, I was breathing hard, my lungs aching from the cold air. The wood of the steps groaned under my weight. The paint was gone, weathered down to the silvered grain of the wood itself. I tried the front door. Locked, of course. I circled the house, my boots crunching in the snow. The windows were dark eyes staring out at nothing. They were old, single-pane glass, and one on the side of the house, smaller than the others, looked loose in its frame. It was a bathroom window, clouded with grime. I wiped a patch clean with my sleeve and peered inside. Darkness. I pushed on the frame. It rattled. Using the edge of my nearly useless wallet, I scraped at the crumbling putty around the pane until I could get my numb fingers underneath. I pulled. The window slid up with a dry screech. It was just big enough. For a moment, I hesitated. This was breaking and entering. Another charge on a record that was already smudged. But the alternative was freezing on the side of the road. It wasn't much of a choice. I hoisted myself up and through, landing awkwardly on a cold, tiled floor. The air inside was even colder than outside, and it carried a different kind of chill. It was a dead, still cold, thick with the smell of dust and decay and forgotten things. I stood there in the small, dark bathroom, listening. The only sound was the wind whining around the corners of the house. I felt my way out into a hallway, my hands trailing along a wall covered in textured, peeling wallpaper. I moved through the house like a ghost, my sneakers silent on the dusty floorboards. In the living room, furniture sat under white sheets, their shapes like sleeping animals. A grand stone fireplace dominated one wall, its mouth full of darkness and ash. In the kitchen, a calendar was still hanging on the wall. The picture was of a lighthouse, and the month was October. 10 years ago. That was the year they told me she died. I opened the fridge out of habit. It was empty, clean, and smelled faintly of baking soda. Someone had prepared this place to be left. It hadn't been abandoned in a panic. It had been put to sleep. That night, I pulled a sheet off one of the couches. It smelled of cedar and thyme. I huddled under it, fully clothed, shivering in the profound, consuming darkness. I didn't feel like a criminal. I didn't feel like I was home. I just felt like I was hiding. A boy in a box, waiting for the lid to be lifted by someone who would tell him where to go next. I fell into a restless sleep, dreaming of red taillights disappearing into a storm. The next morning, I woke to a world of pale, gray light. The snow had stopped. The silence in the house was absolute. My first thought was survival. I had $100. I needed food, and I needed to figure out how to get warm without burning the place down. I explored the house more thoroughly in the daylight. Upstairs, there were 2 bedrooms. One was clearly a master bedroom, with a large 4-poster bed, also shrouded in a sheet. The other was smaller. It was a child's room. The wallpaper was a faded pattern of little blue rockets and yellow stars. There was a small desk, a bookshelf with a few dog-eared paperbacks, and a single bed. A knot formed in my stomach. I walked over to the desk and ran my fingers over the surface. There were faint scratches in the wood. Initials. L.T. Leo Thompson. My initials. A memory, thin and fragile as a spider's web, surfaced. Me, a small boy, sitting at this desk with a forbidden pocket knife, carefully carving my name into the wood. My grandmother scolding me, but not with any real anger. Her voice, I could almost hear it, a low, gentle hum. I sank onto the edge of the small bed, the springs groaning in protest. I had been here. I had lived here. This wasn't just some random empty house. This was my room. The realization didn't feel triumphant. It felt like a punch to the gut. All those years, drifting through other people's houses, sleeping in other people's beds, while this room, my room, sat here waiting, empty. The weight of it was too much. I stood up and paced the small space, my own ghost in my own museum. Why was it still here? If the bank had foreclosed, wouldn't they have cleared it all out? Sold it? It made no sense. For the rest of the day, I focused on the practical. I found a stack of old newspapers and a book of matches in the kitchen. In the massive stone fireplace, I carefully built a small fire. The flue was stiff, but I managed to get it open. The first puffs of smoke filled the room before the draft caught, and then, slowly, miraculously, the fire began to burn, sucking the smoke up the chimney. The warmth it offered was pathetic against the deep cold of the house, but it was something. It was a start. I spent the afternoon prying open the back door, which was swollen in its frame, and then walked the 2 miles to the nearest town, a small, sleepy place with a single main street. I bought bread, peanut butter, canned soup, and a cheap, thick pair of gloves. The woman at the general store looked at me with open curiosity, but she didn't ask any questions. People in small towns, I was learning, either ask too many questions or none at all. I was grateful for the latter. That night, huddled by the fire, eating soup straight from the can, I felt a flicker of something that wasn't just fear or despair. It was a sense of ownership, a dangerous feeling. I was an intruder, a squatter. But as I looked around the shadowed living room, at the shrouded shapes of the furniture, I felt a connection to this place that I couldn't explain. It was a house of ghosts, and I was one of them. The next day, I decided to tackle the basement. The door was in the kitchen, a heavy wooden thing with a simple hook-and-eye latch. I needed firewood, and I figured there might be some old lumber or something flammable down there. The air that rose to meet me as I opened the door was damp and earthy, the smell of cellars everywhere. I found a flashlight in a kitchen drawer. The batteries were miraculously still good. The beam cut a weak yellow circle through the oppressive dark as I descended the creaky wooden stairs. The cellar was huge, much larger than I expected. Stone walls, a packed dirt floor. It was mostly empty, except for a few rotting wooden shelves against the far wall and an old defunct furnace that looked like an iron octopus. I swept the light across the floor, looking for anything useful. And that's when I saw it. Sitting perfectly in the center of the dirt floor, as if placed there only moments ago. A single, white envelope. My heart hammered against my ribs. It made no sense. The house had been sealed for a decade. The snow outside was undisturbed except for my own tracks. No one had been here. No one could have gotten in. I approached it slowly, my flashlight beam trembling. The envelope was clean, crisp, stark white against the dark earth. There was no dust on it. My name was written on the front in elegant, looping cursive. Leo. Just Leo. My hands shook as I picked it up. The paper was thick, expensive. I turned it over. There was no return address. It wasn't sealed with glue, but with a small red wax seal. The design was a simple, stylized tree. With trembling fingers, I broke the seal and pulled out the single sheet of paper inside. The handwriting was the same as on the envelope. The letter began without preamble. My dearest Leo, if you are reading this, then you have found your way home. I knew you would. A part of you always remembered the way. I had to read the sentence 3 times before it registered. I sank to my knees on the cold cellar floor, the flashlight beam dancing crazily on the stone walls. My grandmother. It had to be her. But she was dead. They told me she was dead. I kept reading. I imagine you are cold and scared and very confused. I am sorry for that. I am sorry for so many things. But everything I have done to protect you. There are things you do not know about this house, about our family, about the world. Things the state would never tell you. They are not lies, what they told you, but they are not the truth either. The truth is more complicated. The letter was short. It ended with a simple instruction. There is a loose stone in the wall behind the furnace. You will find what you need to get through the next few days. Be brave, my boy. This is only the beginning. Another letter will be waiting for you tomorrow. Your loving grandmother, Ilara. I scrambled over to the old furnace, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I ran my hands along the cold, rough stones of the wall behind it. And there it was, a stone, slightly different in color and texture from the others. It was loose. I worked my fingers into the cracks around it and pulled. It came free with a grating sound, revealing a small, dark cavity. Inside was a metal box, a simple cash box. It wasn't locked. I lifted the lid. It was full of cash, neat stacks of 20s and 50s. And on top of the money was a set of keys. One of them looked like a key to the front door. I sat back on my heels, the metal box in my lap, the letter clutched in my hand. My mind was a whirlwind of questions. How? How was this possible? Was this some kind of elaborate prank? But who would do this? And why? The money felt real. The keys looked real. The letter felt like a voice from the grave, a loving voice. I counted the money. $2,000. More money than I had ever seen in my life. It was enough to eat, to buy warm clothes, to be safe for a little while. It was a lifeline. But it was also a deepening mystery. Another letter tomorrow. How? I looked around the empty, silent cellar. There were no hidden doors, no secret passages that I could see. The windows were small, high up on the wall, and covered in cobwebs and grime, clearly untouched for years. It was impossible. And yet, here was the proof, cold and heavy in my hands. That night, I slept in my old bed upstairs, not on the couch. I used the key to lock the front door from the inside. It wasn't just a hideout anymore. It felt, for the first time, like maybe it was mine. Before I fell asleep, I thought about the words in the letter. Not lies, but not the truth. What did that mean? And what truth was waiting for me in the next letter? The house was still cold, still dark, but for the first time since I'd arrived, I wasn't just afraid. I was hopeful. The next morning, I went down to the cellar, my heart pounding with a mixture of dread and anticipation. And there it was, in the exact same spot. Another clean white envelope with my name on it, sealed with the same red wax tree. It was impossible. Utterly, completely impossible. I had swept the floor the night before, making sure there was nothing there. I'd checked every corner of the cellar. There was no way in, and yet the letter was there. This time, I didn't hesitate. I snatched it up and tore it open. "My Leo," it began, "I hope you slept well. I know that little bed was always your favorite. Today, I want to tell you about this house. The state records will tell you it was repossessed by the county for back taxes and sold to a holding company. This is the not lie. It was. But the holding company, Northwood Ventures, was one I created, through a lawyer. I sold the house to myself for a penny. I paid the back taxes and set up a trust to continue paying them every year. This house was never lost, my boy. It was waiting. It has been waiting for you. I had to sit down on the bottom step of the stairs. My legs felt weak. She had planned this. For 10 years, she had planned for this moment. She had known I would be cast out of the system at 18, and she had built me an ark, a refuge, and hidden it in plain sight. The letter went on to explain more about the trust, about the lawyer who managed it, a man named Arthur Abernathy in the nearby town. Do not contact him yet, the letter warned. He is a good man, but a cautious one. He follows instructions to the letter. His instructions are to consider the property abandoned until you legally claim it. We must be ready before you walk into his office. There are forces that want this land, Leo. They are patient, but their patience is running out. The letter ended like the first. There is firewood stacked and covered by a tarp behind the old barn. There are canned goods in a hidden pantry behind the cellar. You are a smart boy. You will find it. Stay warm. Stay safe. Tomorrow, we will talk about your parents. My parents? The file said they had died in a car accident when I was 5, a drunk driver. It was the bedrock story of my life, the tragic, simple explanation for everything that came after. The thought of that story changing, of that foundation cracking, terrified me more than the impossible appearance of the letters. I found the hidden pantry easily enough. One of the rotting wooden shelves swung inward, revealing a small, closet-sized space stacked high with canned vegetables, soup, beans, and jars of preserved fruit. There were even tins of coffee and bags of flour and sugar. It was a treasure trove, a decade-old larder prepared for a siege. Later, I found the woodpile, just where she said it would be. The wood was dry and seasoned. I spent the rest of the day carrying wood into the house, stacking it by the fireplace. The physical work felt good. It kept my mind from spinning out of control. With a steady supply of wood, the house began to lose its deep, bone-chilling cold. It wasn't warm, but it was bearable. The fire in the hearth was no longer a desperate flicker. It was a steady, beating heart in the center of the house. Every morning for the next week, a new letter was there. Each one was a piece of a puzzle I never knew existed. I learned about my grandmother's life. She was a librarian, a quiet woman who loved books and the land. She wrote about her grief after my parents died and her fierce, desperate love for me. She wrote about her fight with social services. They deemed her too old, too poor, too frail to raise a young boy who had just been through a major trauma. They took me from her, and it broke her heart. They said it was for your own good, Leo, one letter read. They put you with a young, stable couple, and then another, and then another. They broke their own promises, and they broke you in the process. I knew I could not fight the state. It is an engine that grinds down people like us. So I decided to go around it. I made a plan. And then came the letter about my parents. I almost couldn't bring myself to open it. I let it sit on the kitchen table for hours, a white rectangle of judgment. Finally, when the sun began to set, painting the snow outside in shades of orange and pink, I broke the seal. The story they told you about your parents is the easiest one, it began. It is not the true one. Your father, my son, was a good man, but he got mixed up with bad people. He owed them money, a lot of money. The car accident was no accident. It was a message. They ran him off the road. Your mother died with him. You were in the back seat, Leo. You survived. The state knew this. They sealed the records to protect you, to keep you from being a target. They put you in the system to make you disappear. It was a cruel kindness, but perhaps a kindness nonetheless. I never forgave them for it. I cried then. For the first time since I arrived, I sat at that dusty kitchen table and sobbed. I cried for the parents I never knew, not for the tragic victims of a random accident, but for the flawed, real people who had been murdered. I cried for the little boy in the back seat, and I cried for my grandmother, who had carried this terrible secret alone for so long. The letters that followed laid out the rest of it. The men my father owed money to were part of a powerful development corporation. The same corporation that, through a series of shell companies, was now trying to acquire all the land in this valley, including hers. They had been pressuring her for years, and she knew they would come for the land after she was gone. They think this property is just another square on a map, she wrote. They do not understand that it is a legacy. It is your legacy, Leo. It is all I have to give you. The final letter in that first week gave me a new set of instructions. It led me to a loose floorboard in my old bedroom closet. Beneath it was another metal box. This one contained a thick stack of documents, a birth certificate, a social security card, a deed to the house signed over to a trust with my name on it, to be activated on my 18th birthday, and a will, her will. It named me as the sole beneficiary of the trust, the house, the land, and everything in it. There was also a simple, hand-drawn map of the property, with a spot marked near an old oak tree at the edge of the woods. The letter explained, "This is everything you need to prove who you are. The time has come to see Mr. Abernathy. Show him these. He will understand. But be prepared, Leo. The moment you claim this house, you are no longer invisible. They will see you, and they will come for you." That week of letters felt like a lifetime. I had arrived as a boy, a piece of driftwood tossed from the system. But my grandmother's words, reaching out from across time, were changing me. They were giving me a history, a foundation. The world was no longer a random, hostile place. It was a place where my grandmother had fought for me, planned for me, and loved me. But her words also presented me with a terrifying choice. I could take the documents, claim the house, and then sell it. The land was valuable. I could walk away with enough money to start a new life anywhere, a life of comfort and anonymity. Or I could stay. I could fight. I could try to hold on to this piece of earth that she had sacrificed everything for. I could try to make it a home. The thought was overwhelming. I was 18 years old. I knew how to survive in institutions. I didn't know how to own land, how to fight a corporation, how to build a life from scratch. The next morning, there was no letter in the cellar. I felt a pang of loss, of abandonment that was shockingly intense. I had grown accustomed to her voice guiding me each morning. The silence felt like a test. The choice was now mine alone. I spent the day walking the property, the deed and the will in my jacket pocket. The land was beautiful. About 30 acres of rolling fields and woods, bordered by a small, clear creek. I found the old oak tree from the map. It was a giant, its bare branches like arms reaching for the sky. This was my land. The words felt foreign, impossible. As dusk fell, I stood on the porch, looking out at the valley. The weight of the past 10 years, of the next 50, seemed to press down on me. It was then that I saw the headlights, a single vehicle turning off Crestfall Road and coming up my driveway. My driveway. A sleek black SUV, the kind that looks completely out of place in the countryside. It crunched to a stop, its headlights cutting through the twilight, pinning me in their glare. My first instinct was to run, to hide, but I didn't. I stood my ground on the porch of my house. A man in a sharp suit got out. He was older, with silver hair and a calm, professional demeanor. He walked towards the porch, his expensive shoes crunching in the snow. "Leo Thompson?" he asked. His voice was polite but firm. I just nodded, my mouth suddenly dry. "My name is Arthur Abernathy," he said, extending a hand. "I believe we have a great deal to discuss." I didn't take his hand. I just stared at him. How did he know I was here? "How did you find me?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Mr. Abernathy sighed, a small cloud of condensation in the cold air. He gestured to a small, discreet security camera mounted high on the corner of the barn, a camera I had never noticed. "Your grandmother was a very thorough woman. The trust was set up to alert me the moment any activity was registered on this property after your 18th birthday. The camera feed came online 3 days ago. I've been observing. I wanted to give you time to settle in before I approached." His gaze was steady, assessing me. "May I come in? It's freezing out here." I hesitated, then stepped aside and let him pass. He moved through the house with a sense of familiarity, his eyes taking in the fire, the stacked firewood, the cans of soup on the kitchen counter. He seemed to approve. "You're resourceful," he said. She would have liked that. We sat at the kitchen table, the documents from the hidden box spread out between us. He examined each one carefully, his expression unreadable. "This is all in order," he said finally, stacking them neatly. "The will is valid. The trust is clear. As of your 18th birthday, you are the legal owner of this property, free and clear." He paused, leaning back in his chair. "Which brings us to the difficult part." He explained the situation, confirming everything the letters had said. The Development Corporation, a subsidiary of a much larger, more powerful entity, had been buying up the entire valley. My grandmother's farm was the last independent parcel of land. It was the key to their entire project. "They've been making offers for years," Abernathy said. "Your grandmother always refused. Since her passing, the offers have continued to come to my office as the trustee. They are substantial." He slid a folder across the table. I opened it. The letterhead was from a high-powered law firm. The offer was for $2 million. $2 million. The number seemed unreal, like something from a movie. I could feel the number pulsing in the room, a siren song of escape. No more cold nights, no more scraping by. I could go anywhere, be anyone. A clean break, a new life, bought and paid for. "They are prepared to close in 30 days, Abernathy said, his voice neutral. "All you have to do is sign." I looked from the offer letter to his face. I was trying to read him, to see what he thought I should do. But his expression was perfectly blank. He was a lawyer. He was presenting the facts. "What would she have done?" I asked quietly. A flicker of something crossed his face then, a brief softening of his professional mask. "Elara?" he said, a hint of fondness in his voice. "She would have told them to go to hell. But Elara isn't here, son. You are. She didn't go through all this trouble to trap you. She did it to give you a choice, a real one, for the first time in your life." He stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. "My card is on the table. The offer is valid for 1 week. You call me when you've made your decision." And with that, he left. The sound of his SUV faded, leaving me once again in the profound silence of the house, with a choice that felt heavy enough to crush me. $2 million. The easy way out. The smart way out. Every rational part of my brain screamed at me to take it. But then I thought of the letters, of the voice that had guided me out of the darkness. I thought of the little boy carving his initials into a desk, of a grandmother who built an ark for her grandson while the world washed him away. That night was the longest of my life. I didn't sleep. I paced the old floorboards, from the living room to the kitchen, up the stairs to my childhood bedroom, and back down again. I was at war with myself. One part of me, the part forged in the cold calculus of the system, saw the money as a key. It was freedom, safety, a ticket out of a life of being powerless. The other part of me, a part I was just beginning to know, felt the pull of this place, of the roots that my grandmother had so carefully preserved for me. It wasn't just land, it was a story, my story, and selling it felt like tearing out the last page. I found myself in the cellar again, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the familiar dark. I stood in the center of the room, where the letters had appeared. I don't know what I was expecting, a sign, a final message, but there was nothing, just the cold earth and the silent stone walls. And in that moment, I realized the letters had stopped because my grandmother's work was done. She had led me here, given me the truth, and handed me the keys. The rest was up to me. What kind of man did I want to be? The kind who took the money and ran, or the kind who stayed and fought for a home? It was almost dawn when I finally stopped pacing. I stood in front of the cold fireplace, the offer letter in my hand. I looked at the number, all those zeros. They represented a life without struggle. But I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that a life without struggle wasn't what I wanted. I wanted a life with meaning. I wanted a life that would make my grandmother proud. I walked to the fireplace and dropped the letter into the ashes of last night's fire. I watched the corner of the paper curl and brown. Then I went to the kitchen, picked up the phone, a landline that, to my surprise, had a dial tone, and called Mr. Abernathy. It was early, but he answered on the second ring. "Abernathy," he said, his voice crisp. "It's Leo Thompson," I said, my own voice steadier than I expected. "I've made my decision." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "And?" "Tell them the answer is no," I said. "The property is not for sale." I could almost hear the smile in his voice. "Very good, Mr. Thompson," he said. "I will inform them immediately. Be prepared. They won't be happy." "I'm prepared," I said, and for the first time in my life, I believed it. The aftermath of that phone call was swift. The next day, a notice of condemnation was posted on my front door, citing a dozen bogus code violations. The day after that, I was served with a lawsuit challenging the validity of my grandmother's will. The development corporation was playing hardball, but Mr. Abernathy was ready. He showed up that afternoon with a file of his own, thick with precedents and counter-motions. "I've been waiting for this fight for 10 years, Leo," he said, a grim smile on his face. "Ilara and I prepared for every possible contingency." He explained that the trust my grandmother had set up contained more than just the deed. It also contained a significant amount of money, invested wisely over the years, specifically for this legal battle. It wasn't $2 million, but it was enough. It was a war chest. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal paperwork, inspections, and quiet intimidation. Cars would park on the road outside my house for hours at a time. Men in suits would walk the property line, taking pictures. They were trying to scare me, to wear me down. But with every move they made, I felt my resolve harden. This wasn't just a fight for a piece of land anymore. It was a fight for my grandmother's memory. It was a fight for me. During that time, the house began to transform. With Abernathy's help, I got the power turned back on and the water running. I spent my days cleaning, repairing, and exploring. I uncovered old photographs, my grandmother's journals, my father's high school yearbooks. The house was giving up its ghosts, and they were becoming my family. I learned how to patch a roof, how to fix a leaky faucet, how to plant a winter garden. The work was hard, but it was honest. Every nail I hammered, every window I cleaned, was an act of defiance. It was me, claiming my home, not with a signature, but with my own 2 hands. The community, which had at first been wary of the stranger in the old Elara Thompson place, began to notice. The woman from the general store dropped off a casserole one evening. An old farmer down the road showed up with a tractor and helped me clear the driveway after a heavy snow. They had all been fighting their own quiet battles against the developers for years. In me, they saw a new front in the war. They saw Elara's grandson, and that meant something here. I wasn't alone anymore. The legal battle raged for almost a year. It was a grinding, expensive war of attrition. But we held on. Abernathy was a brilliant lawyer, and my grandmother's planning had been flawless. We won a key motion to have the lawsuit dismissed. The condemnation order was thrown out by a judge who saw it for the harassment it was. Finally, one crisp autumn day, Abernathy called me. The corporation had withdrawn its final appeal. They were giving up. They were moving on. We had won. That evening, I walked out to the old oak tree at the edge of the woods. The leaves were turning brilliant shades of red and gold. I stood there for a long time, just breathing the clean, cold air. The fight was over. I had done it. I had saved my home. But looking back at the house, with smoke curling from its chimney and a warm light glowing in the windows, I realized it wasn't the house I had saved. It was me. The house, the land, the letters, they had saved me. They had given me a place to stand, a story to own, and a future to build. Home, I've learned, isn't just a place you are given. It's a place you choose. It's a place you fight for. Sometimes, the most valuable inheritance isn't money or property, but a story that gives you the strength to become who you were always meant to be. My grandmother left me a house, but she gave me a home. She gave me back my past so I could build my future. And that's a gift worth more than any number of zeros on a check. So now, the work continues. The house still needs a lot of love. The fields need to be tilled. But for the first time in my life, I'm not just surviving. I'm building. I'm planting roots in the soil my grandmother protected for me. The silence of the house is no longer empty. It's peaceful. It's filled with the promise of tomorrow. If you've made it this far, thank you. This story was hard to tell, but it's an important one to me. It's about how even when you feel completely lost, there can be a path waiting for you. A path laid down by the love of people you may not even remember. Have you ever had a moment that changed the way you saw your own past? A discovery that redefined your story? I want you to share it in the comments below. I promise I read every single one. This channel is more than just a place for stories. It's a community for people who understand that sometimes the most broken places are the ones that can make you the most whole. If you believe in second chances and in the power of finding home, please consider subscribing. Let's keep sharing the stories that matter, because your story matters, and you are not alone.